in a position where the basic foundations don't look right, Mr. President. And when you take us now, Mr. President, in the 15 minutes that I have, into the areas of energy, international security, and into public procurement, you're left with serious concern. Because, Mr. President, we're told, listen, let's accept that if you were to crystallize everything that the government says, that they are definitely going to achieve tightening of measures and solve leakages in the system. That's what a ministry is supposed to do. Each man in his ministry, being noble as he is, on the road to somewhere, hopefully all together, is busy doing his job. But, Mr. President, we've got a 5-year political cycle. And in that 5-year political cycle, how do we deliver the salvation that we need, knowing that the foundation is not what we have been told the foundation is, Mr. President? So how do we get there? Dare I say, the way that we get there is to come and in particular pay attention to energy. Energy, Mr. President, if I were to cut it down in its quickest form, is not a mere 43% of our revenue, Mr. President. The energy sector contributes well over 50%, because you have to factor production sharing arrangements, royalties, the impact from the transportation sector, the actual revenue delivered, Mr. President. When you look at it, energy is 50% of what we do at minimum, Mr. President. We have noble sentiments expressed by a young minister of energy, 1 year my junior. I'm actually 1 year older than someone. But, Mr. President, when we look at the energy transformation policy, that is the thing that we've got to focus on. Because if you want to answer the riddle that echoes in the mind of the Minister of Finance as to why is it that people don't have confidence, the statement is you need to have confidence by an expression of a stated plan that is bankable, Mr. President. Bankable to the private sector in particular, upon whom we have openly stated we're going to rely. 3 kickers, 3 horses, as Senator Ramkilawan refers to them: the private sector, the consumer sector, the government sector. The government has come forward and said, private sector, baton over to you, but I'm still holding on to a piece of it. I don't know how that's going to run unless we can inspire the confidence for bankable projects. And, Mr. President, one very serious bankable project in energy that I would have hoped the Honourable Minister of Energy could have had the blessing from his government to come with is to tell us how we are going to solve the very difficult situation of the inefficiencies of Petrotrin. Let's accept AG, run off and do what you need to do. Sue the whole world if you want to. How are we fixing Petrotrin? For one moment, say I'm the new manager. Petrotrin has a difficulty on its plate. We've got oil production that needs to be better, Mr. President. But at the same point in time, we have resources as a country vested in natural gas. And then we have resources vested in urea. And resources vested in ammonia, Mr. President. So we are competing in our own environment with very limited skills, Mr. President. And we are continuing to leave Petrotrin as a standalone aspect. We know Trinma is its jewel. We know Petrotrin has a very difficult problem that I hope my good friend Senator Abdullah can help us with. Because part of the reason why people accept the People's Partnership's position as a government is the fact that it came on board hand in hand with Labour. And Petrotrin, if you call a spade, has a very peculiar labour environment that needs serious attention to foster proper tripartite relationships, as my learned senior Senator Prescott said. We've got to get that engine working inside of there. So what is the solution? NGC with resources competing, Petrotrin with resources competing, Trinma with resources competing, urea, ammonia. Mr. President, doesn't it scream out to us, by way of a possible alternative, that we should consider amalgamating the energy enterprises that we have, Mr. President, under one umbrella, Mr. President, rationalize losses and profits, centralized delivery systems, Mr. President, because it does a number of things. One, it allows us to step onto the marketplace as a bigger man. Two, it allows us to adequately encourage market development, Mr. President, of a type that we've not seen. And that is on the global financial position and, in fact, on the equities market, Mr. President. Because as a larger amalgamated enterprise, Mr. President, this new energy corporation which we could have would have the benefit of significant revenues, Mr. President, serious asset bases, Mr. President, but it could go, Mr. President, even further, and more importantly, addressing the 3 M's that Senator Ramkilawan spoke about in addressing market and manufacturing, Mr. President. We can look particularly at the market aspect of saying we now have the opportunity to take our product to a different level. If you really want to stimulate encouragement into the capital market, the stock exchange, Mr. President, I agree that the junior market is a good idea. I think that there are a lot of problems in how we're going to solve the balancing between the $5 million and $50 million capitals that we have in the environment of the company's legislation that we have. Put that aside. It would be a wonderful thing, Mr. President, and something which I promote and ask all senators to consider, that we were to in fact take this new entity that would own these enterprises in the energy sector, putting them under one umbrella, and then, Mr. President, doing 2 things. One, going out to get a partner to market our products further down the line so that we are not stuck with a net back position, wellhead position, where we're looking at getting, as last year Senator Ramkilawan told us, the crumbs off the table, where we should be looking to market along the line, Mr. President. And secondly, Mr. President, it would allow us in that point to have something when the oil runs out. When oil and gas is depleted here, Mr. President, the position is going to be that we would have structures in place. So what are we going to do with Point Lisas and Labibco and the different industrial estates? Are we going to turn them to scrap metal? Why not do exactly as Senator Karim has recommended, get the Singapore model and put it in, Mr. President, such that we can actually process other fields. And on that basis, I call upon the Minister of Energy to account to us not only on the gas pricing formula, in a way, because he's not really gone on to the formula itself, but his basis for pegging the gas and oil as to where he has, but to tell us what has happened. Caroline Sipasad Bechan, then Minister of Energy last year, came, beat the table all how on the 21st of September 2010 as to what she was going to do in relation to gas and Venezuela and CNG. Nothing, Mr. President. Nothing has happened. Absolutely nothing. If you bring them onto the table and say, this is your list on the left-hand column, as Minister Vasant Bharat did, and here is your performance on the right-hand column, Senator Karim is right. We would have to, in fact, Mr. President, give an F. But the problem, Mr. President, is when we look to this model that I am proposing, and we in the PNM are seriously looking at this as a proposal, Mr. President, when we look at this model, we can take our gas further down the market. We can then, in fact, bring it onto the financial floor, Mr. President, onto the trading market. And, Mr. President, it isn't as if this doesn't exist elsewhere. It exists, for instance, in Ecopetrol from Colombia. A very successful model, Mr. President. When you look at that model, it was articulated in the Energy Chamber. In fact, I believe it was past Minister of Finance Motley who raised the issue. I myself took note of it when I visited Colombia last month. When you look at the position, Mr. President, there is serious room, Mr. President, for us to have a partner on the exercise of taking our shares, putting it onto the capital market, buying it and trading. Ecopetrol had the experience of taking a fragmented company, centralizing it, putting it together, and then taking it onto not only their local market, but onto the foreign markets in New York, Mr. President. And that's a model there. But, Mr. President, you know what the tragedy is? I can say with absolute certainty that the PNM, when it left the Ministry of Energy, in fact signed an MOU to this effect. a formula which would have resulted in the bring on of a